The worst Christmas deaths ever. The Grapevine Santa murders. On Christmas morning 2011, 56-year-old Aziz Yazdanpana arrived at the home of his estranged wife and family in Grapevine, Texas, dressed in a Santa Claus outfit. The house was filled with laughter and chatter as family members exchanged holiday greetings. Wrapping paper was scattered across the rooms, Christmas lights twinkled in rhythm, and presents were stacked under the tree. Thanks to his thoughtful clothing, Aziz blended smoothly into the holiday scene. But in a twist no one saw coming, Aziz pulled out a firearm. One by one, he fired at his wife, their 2 teenage kids, his wife's sister, her husband, and their young daughter. Screams quickly took over the once joyful home, and chaos erupted as family members fled to safety. But the bullets were relentless, and in no time, 7 people had lost their lives. The scene was total carnage, with unwrapped presents and Christmas decorations strewn all over. However, Aziz wasn't done. After the chilling murders, he turned the gun on himself. The place of love, warmth, and celebration had become a scene straight from a horror movie. When emergency responders arrived, they were greeted with blood on the carpet, lifeless bodies, and the chilling realization that Santa Claus had brought death instead of joy. The Covina Santa Massacre. On December 24, 2008, a family was in their 2-story home in Covina, California, laughing and enjoying food when Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, dressed as Santa, rang the doorbell. Pardo was carrying a gift-wrapped package and was the estranged husband of Sylvia Pardo, a member of the family partying inside. Immediately, the door opened, and the holiday turned into a nightmare. Pardo pulled out a handgun from beneath the wrapping and started firing. Guests scrambled and screamed as they sought cover. Terrified kids ran for the back door, but undeterred, Pardo went on to set off a homemade flamethrower, engulfing the house in flames. When the firefighters arrived, the home was an inferno. 9 people were already dead, some burned beyond recognition. In fact, some of the bodies were only identified through dental records. Pardo fled after committing the grievous crime, removing the Santa suit before taking his own life hours later. The Covina Massacre remains one of the most shocking Christmas crimes in U.S. history, a chilling reminder that even the most familiar symbols of warmth can disguise unimaginable darkness. The murder of Zazelle Preston. Christmas Day 2011 started on a high note for 26-year-old Zazelle Preston at her family home in Anaheim, California. It was peaceful. The scent of holiday meals filled the air and gifts lay unopened. But a few hours into the afternoon, everything turned on its head. A violent struggle erupted between Zazelle and her husband, William Wallace, after he attacked her. Wallace assaulted Zazelle brutally over an extended period, causing her to suffer severe blows to her body and head. Each attempt to escape was met with brutal force, and with time, Zazelle grew weaker and started bleeding. By the time neighbors and authorities were arriving, Zazelle had already succumbed to her injuries. But an even more chilling revelation would soon come to light. Wallace reportedly dragged Zazelle's body from the bedroom, put her on the living room couch, allegedly with glasses on, as their 3 terrified kids aged between 7 weeks and 8 watched. And if that wasn't extreme enough, Wallace would tell the children that Mommy got drunk and ruined Christmas, before making them open their presents in front of their mother's body. The murder shocked the Anaheim community due to the violence meted out on a mother and a wife on a day meant for celebrating family. William Wallace was arrested and convicted of second-degree murder in April 2021. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The murder of Christy Bamu. On December 25, 2010, 15-year-old Christy Bamu was in his London home, living a nightmare that had gone on for several days. Bamu had been tortured over and over, getting beaten with metal bars, knives, hammers, chisels, and pliers. Behind this terrifying brutality were his own sister and her boyfriend, who accused Bamu of being a witch. While Bamu's fear and pain had already reached a fever pitch, his aggressors weren't about to quit. That morning, they drowned Bamu in a bath, and his body finally gave in. Over the course of the torture, he had suffered over 100 injuries, each a testament to the calculated torment and cruelty of his sister and her partner. Police discovered the scene several hours later. From the outside, the home seemed ordinary, but inside lay a completely different story. Bamu's body was so weak from days of torture, and the abuse it had endured was difficult to ignore. His sister and boyfriend were arrested immediately. During a court session, it was heard that Bamu had been in so much pain that he was reportedly begging to die before he was submerged. The duo was convicted of murder in 2012 and sentenced to life in prison. The execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu. Christmas Day 1989 was the worst day for former Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena. The duo had been captured by revolutionary forces and removed from power following weeks of protests and violent clashes that ended with the collapse of their communist regime. The couple was quickly moved to a military base outside Targovista and put through a hastily convened trial. Nicolae and Elena were accused of damage to the economy, genocide, and abuse of power. All the while, they stood together facing a panel of judges and soldiers who'd already decided they were guilty. The trial lasted barely an hour and was laden with shouted denials, accusations, and the weight of decades of oppression. Immediately after the verdict was reached, Nicolae and Elena were led to a wall outside the room. A firing squad then moved forward, raised their weapons, and within seconds, gunfire cracked the cold December air. The couple was struck repeatedly and dropped to the ground. Their lives had ended violently, publicly, and decisively. The news quickly got around the world. The footage of the trial and the dead couple was broadcast globally, marking the end of communism in Romania. Charlie Lawson. It was Christmas morning in 1929. The first light cut through the frost that covered the Lawson farmhouse in Germantown, North Carolina. Inside, everything appeared picture-perfect. Wrapped presents laid under the Christmas tree, a new family portrait decorated the wall, and the smell of the previous night's baking still lingered in the air. The family lay asleep. That is apart from Charlie Lawson, who had woken up early and checked up on his wife and 7 children. To anyone looking in, Lawson was a hard-working farmer and a dedicated family man looking forward to celebrating Christmas with his kin. However, by mid-morning, the otherwise calm day had suddenly turned dark. Lawson, now armed with a shotgun, positioned himself near the family's tobacco barn where he waited until his 2 daughters, Carrie, 12, and Maybelle, 7, were within range. Then he shot them. He then approached where they lay and bludgeoned them to make sure they were dead before dragging their bodies to the barn. Lawson then walked towards his house, shooting his wife, Fanny, who was seated on the porch, followed by his other children, Marie, 17, James, 4, and Raymond, 2. Finally, he bludgeoned Mary Lou, just 4 months old at the time. After committing the horrific murders, Lawson went into the nearby woods, where, hours later, he shot himself. The only survivor was his eldest child, Arthur, then 19. Lawson had sent Arthur on an errand before he carried out his plan. Even more disturbing is the way Lawson took time to position the bodies. Arms crossed and rocks under their heads. Just like the mysterious placement of the bodies, no one knows for sure why Lawson ended the lives of his wife and children, with speculation ranging from poor mental state to Lawson impregnating his daughter Marie. The tragedy shook Germantown to its core, forever tainting the town's Christmas. The Downtown Posse Killing Spree. Christmas Eves in Dayton, Ohio are cold and snowy, and in 1992 it was no different. As cold winds swept the streets of the city's run-down neighborhoods, a small gang of teenagers who had nicknamed themselves the Downtown Posse moved through the streets looking for easy targets. Led by then 19-year-old ringleader Marvelous Matthew Keene, the gang consisted of 3 other members: Keene's girlfriend, Laura Jean Taylor, 16, DeMarcus Maurice Smith, 17, and Smith's girlfriend, Heather Nicole Matthews, 20. Their first target was a 34-year-old man known as Joseph Wilkerson. Wilkerson knew Taylor, something that the gang used to lure him with the intention of stealing from. However, what would begin as petty theft on that fateful Christmas Eve would spiral into one of the most shocking holiday murders in American history. Wilkerson invited the 4 to his home, a decision that would cost him his life. They tied him up on his bed with electrical cords before gagging and shooting him. They then ransacked his house and fled in one of Wilkerson's cars. Instead of going home or hiding, the gang, now armed with Wilkerson's guns, set out in search of more victims. First was 18-year-old Danita Gillette, who they shot at a payphone, making off with her jacket and sneakers, and then Matthew's ex, Jeffrey Wright, later that night. Wright, however, was able to escape and survive the ordeal. The teens would go on to kill 4 other people and injure 1 more before they were finally arrested on December 26, 1992. They were tried for the senseless murders, with Keene receiving a death sentence and the other 3 receiving life sentences. Harry and Harriet Moore. On Christmas night in 1951, Harry Moore, a civil rights activist, and his wife Harriet prepared to retire to bed in their Mims, Florida home after an eventful day of festivities. Harry had spent decades challenging segregation, and Christmas was one of the few occasions where he could rest peacefully, surrounded by close family. What he didn't know, however, is that the racial hatred and violence that he'd fought so hard against had sadly followed him home. A little after midnight, as the couple slept, a bomb that had been planted under the floor of their bedroom exploded violently, throwing the couple from their bed. Harry Moore suffered catastrophic injuries and passed on the way to the hospital. Harriet survived the blast and was admitted to the hospital. Sadly, her injuries were just too severe and she passed away 9 days after her husband. The Moores' deaths were among the earliest assassinations of civil rights leaders. Their home, now in ruin, was left eerily quiet, a brutal reminder of the senseless hatred and cruelty of the time. The murder of John Bennett Ramsey. On Christmas night in 1996, the Ramseys, including Patsy Ramsey, her husband John Ramsey, and their children, Burke, 9-year-old at the time, and John Bennett, then 6, went to bed in their Boulder, Colorado home happy, hoping to open their Christmas presents the next morning. However, in the early hours of Boxing Day, Patsy Ramsey called 911, her voice shaking. Her daughter, John Bennett, was not in her bed, and a ransom note had been left behind on the kitchen staircase. In the long letter, the kidnappers were asking for $118,000 to release the young girl. Officers arrived at the Ramseys' sprawling home almost immediately. However, the scene was strange. There were no footprints in the snow, and inside, there were no signs of forced entry. A couple of hours later, they made a shocking discovery. John Bennett's body lay in a dark corner of the cellar in the basement, wrapped in a white blanket with a cord around her neck and tape over her mouth. The mysterious case of John Bennett gripped America and the world, and decades later, there is still no answer, no arrest, only John Bennett's smiling pageant photos, which have since become a haunting symbol of innocence destroyed. And every Christmas since, her story resurfaces, along with the question, will the perpetrator of such evil ever be caught? The case is still open to this day. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this on your screen, make sure to like and subscribe. If you have stories that you would want us to cover, drop your suggestions in the comments. Thanks for watching.